Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Paula from the product marketing team here at Flashpoint. We are very excited to have a super full house today. This session is going to run somewhere in the 40-minute range, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So please use the Q&A feature to ask questions throughout, and then we'll answer as many as possible at the end. Before we get started with Matt's presentation, I did want to give a quick shout out to especially the team of engineers working on our EchoSec product, which is our geospatial social media product. Generative AI, which is our topic for today, is top of mind for clearly a lot of us, and Flashpoint is no exception there. We are increasingly integrating AI into our products to make our customers' jobs easier. So I wanted to mention recent launch, which is an integrated AI feature in EchoSec that summarizes search results, analyzes sentiment, and makes search recommendations. So be sure to get in touch with us if you want to learn more about that. And with that, I will introduce Matt.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. I'm sitting there watching that. Like, I'm gonna have to play with that later. So, who am I? If you don't know me, I have almost 22 years of a federal law enforcement experience. I retired as an agent about a year and a half ago. I was very lucky. I had outside work authorized for most of my career. So I've also done consulting, taught numerous courses for SANS, and I'm now the author of the Sec 497 Practical OSINT course and the Advanced OSINT courses for SANS. A bunch of other stuff you see there, and also a total cheat code. My wife ran cyber threat intelligence for a Fortune 100 company and now works at another one. So, and why that's a total cheat code is it just gives me a kind of a very well-rounded perspective of how people are using OSINT, not only with my government, law enforcement, intelligence community background, but also now the private sector side as well. So, what are we going to talk about? And this talk has been due. This talk has been kind of building up for about 2 months. It was just a matter of when and where I was going to give it. Because almost a year ago, when ChatGPT was still fairly new, I gave a talk on using ChatGPT for OSINT. And the reason is I was in an OSINT Discord and I saw someone say, yeah, ChatGPT is kind of cool, but I don't really use it for OSINT. And people were agreeing with that. And I'm like, man, really? Like, I'm using this stuff every single day. I really, really, truly am. And so I gave a talk on that that kind of blew up. It got very popular. And everything I said in that talk still stands. But the capabilities have just emerged, right? Just new ones have emerged. Things have changed. We have better versions of things. And so what we're going to cover here, we're not going to rehash what we already covered. We're just going to talk about basically what has changed and different ways that we can kind of incorporate this into our workflow literally today and plus going forward as well. And also, when I did the original talk, the way I kind of designed it was, let me show you something for every phase of the intelligence cycle. And the reason is I didn't want to just focus on how I was using things, right? I know how I'm using it every day, and I will gladly share that. But I wanted to try to cover all the bases and make sure that no matter what you do a lot of, that we talk about some ways that this can just help you do it more effectively, right? And more efficiently, frankly. And so we'll start off with the planning phase, right? And in the original, what I talked about was profile creation, right? Not only biographical information, and I used an example of, give me persona information for a French woman in her 30s. And it just generated this full detailed bio, like names, usernames, background, where they attended college, everything about it. It was fantastic, right? It just makes that so push button easy with quality information. And we also talked about actually taking a photograph, a real photograph you see there of me on the left, morphing it in with an AI generated person, but doing it in a way that passes all these AI detections, right? And still does. I don't have a problem with this technique. I teach it and utilize it all the time. And so once again, those things still stand, right? But we're just going to kind of build on that in this section right here. And we're going to start off by saying ChatGPT and the others, we'll talk about that in a few slides, have gotten a lot better, right? Like ChatGPT 3.5 was so impressive when it came out. It was amazing, but it's gotten so much better, right? GPT-4, likely 4.5 coming out very, very soon. We'll talk about that in a second. But The model sizes have gotten bigger. It's trained on more data. The ChatGPT data set now is the cutoff date is up to December, right? So it's got real kind of very recent and fresh information on there. And it just frankly gives a lot better results than it used to. There's really no other way to describe it. And looking at this chart, the chart is very kind of basic, right? It's like 2 minutes of Microsoft Excel. That's not where I made it. I asked ChatGPT, actually. I said, make me a chart comparing GPT 3.5 and GPT 4. And it made this chart. And if you look, the last thing there is innovative features. And you see how much more innovative features it gives itself now than the 3.5 version. And so I asked ChatGPT, what are some of the innovative features? And it kind of gave me an example of what some of those were. And this right now points out one of the biggest benefits of using ChatGPT through the web interface as opposed to AI. But the thing is, people always want to pick the best one, right? They always want to, is it this or this? Which one's better? Between the using it through the web browser, like most people do, and using it through the API, programmatically with Python code or some other language, it's not one is better than the other. They both have huge advantages that we're going to talk about here, right? Because now we have a very robust API that is extremely easy to use, and we'll talk about the advantages that has. But the biggest advantage that the web client has, in addition to being very, very easy to use, right? There's virtually no bar to entry there, is it has this memory. It has this context. If I asked the API to generate a chart and it generated a chart, and it had innovative features on there, and then I asked a question of what are some of the innovative features with no other context, it wouldn't know what I was talking about. But when you're using ChatGPT, and if you use it a lot or really at all, this, down the left-hand side, we have these historical conversations that we've used in the past. And I can go to a conversation from 2 weeks ago and pick right back up where I left off. Right here, if I ask it to make me a chart and then I ask it a question, it knows that question is in relation to the chart that it just made. The API doesn't have that. I really wish and hope they added in one of these days through like session IDs. And I know there will be a few challenges with that, but that would be amazing. But right now, it's really kind of, I think, the best functionality that the web browser has versus the API. And they've incorporated in some massive improvements, right? Several months ago, OpenAI, who makes ChatGPT, they did their dev day and they added in some new features. Number one, right? Real-time information. It can actually go do lookups on the web. This is huge for OSINT, being able to ask it and have it go retrieve current events, analyze, summarize those, etc. And another one is built-in functionality for letting us bring our own data to bear, right? We can add in our own information and basically have it analyze that or incorporate that information into its analysis. We'll cover that more in just a little bit, right? What that kind of looks like. But Dev Day, frankly, there was a lot of businesses that were springing up that were kind of just doing a little bit of extra functionality wrapped on top of the OpenAI API. And Dev Day, frankly, killed several of those businesses. Like it made them completely unnecessary because now what they were providing was just built into ChatGPT. And it is capable of amazing things right now. And so, as before, where we talked about, hey, just give us biographical information for a persona. Now let's actually see with this improvement in quality, can it actually make a persona, right? And so you see here, I say, hey, I'm going to give you a persona so that when I ask questions, say I'm going to interact with a forum, I want to reply to blog or little forum posts, etc. on there, and I tell it, I want you to tell me how the person would respond, then tell me in English if it's not in English, and then give me an explanation of why you choose to explain that. I asked it if it understood. It said it did. Beautiful. Then I say, you're a young male cyber criminal in Russia. You have strong technical skills and use them to make money online without worrying about any legal consequences since, you're in Russia. And then I asked it, it's like, okay, we're good. Then I just asked it, what's up? Right? That's all I put in there. What's up? And this was the response. We see there, we have the Cyrillic and Russian up top. And then the English translation, which I love, right? All's dope. Grinding on new hacks, cash flowing like a river. How about you? Like I showed this to a friend of mine that speaks a little Russian. And they're like, yeah, no, that's pretty good, right? That's pretty good. And then we have the explanation of what it's saying and why it's saying it. And no, let's be honest. Like I'm not naive. Do I think this is going to be better than someone, an experienced analyst with 10 years of experience and a native Russian speaker and familiar with that space? Like, no, I don't. But do I think this is going to be better than a junior analyst in Google Translate? Quite a bit better, right? Quite a bit better. And once again, we can automate this, right? We can just have it to help us kind of build this persona, to have this memory. So, like I said, it's one of those things where if you want to kind of reply to the occasional forum post, interact, just look a little more real, this is a pretty low bar to entry, right? So, very kind of cool to play with. And when we're talking about these capabilities, the last thing we'll talk about here before we move on to the next section is there's a company, Anthropic, that just came out with a model called Claude 3 Opus. And there's new developments in the space literally daily. Like you could just sit there every day and watch someone on YouTube hyping up some new thing and why it was such a big deal and everything else. And sometimes it's overblown, sometimes it's not. And when these new models come out, right, you always know who the best is at anything in life because it's who everyone else gets compared to, right? Whoever you're comparing people to is generally considered to be the best. And all we've had for the past year is things getting compared to ChatGPT, right? OpenAI. All of a sudden, though, this Claude 3 Opus, the model they just launched a few days ago, I heard some people who don't kind of give into hyperbole say, yeah, it's better than ChatGPT. And so I'm like, all right. And so 2 days ago, I went. It's the same price as ChatGPT. It was $20 a month for like the professional access to the latest version. So I paid it to kind of test it and played with it. And they were right. Like the output is quite a bit better than ChatGPT. And I do not say that lightly. Like I'm actually very impressed by ChatGPT. All year, I've kind of described how I use AI when I'm writing something as I use it like a muse. And what I mean by that is basically like I'll be like, hey, give me 3 paragraphs on this topic and we'll do it. And I can pick out little things like, oh, I actually like that point. Okay, yeah, I like the way they did that. Basically, I'm like picking little nuggets and then I'm writing it in my own words. Yesterday, I was working on a project, nothing super important, not of any major consequence. And I'm like, hey, let's put this Claude 3 through its paces. I gave it some pretty specific instructions. We'll look at some prompts later on in here, and I let it rip. And its output was so good that about half the time I didn't have to change anything. And about the other half of the time, I would just like change 1 or 2 minor things. Like it was that much better. And I think this is kind of a big deal. Not that I'm, oh, switch. Like for most people, right? Like it's not, you don't need access to both, right? Just pick one and go with it. But I think now what we're going to see is OpenAI come back strong, right? I think we'll probably see like GPT 4.5, newer capabilities, and it'll turn into, like most things do, a cat and mouse game. But that's huge, right? Because before they've been at the top of the heap. Now we've seen someone pass them, like legitimately, in my opinion, and several other people's opinion, pass them. And so if the cat and mouse game is on, like that's great because all that does, right, is force more innovation and quicker innovation, frankly. So that's be interested to see what kind of comes out of the space with that. All right. Let us now talk about collection, which anytime you see like an OSINT tool, it's usually in the collection phase. It's the phase that gets, I think, the most publicity, but it's really only one phase of it. And last year, right, we discussed ChatGPT to write Python code to help us collect data. The capability has only gotten better. I write a lot of code now, and by I write a lot of code, I tell ChatGPT what I want, right? And I usually do it in like small pieces and just kind of stick it together almost like little Lego blocks, not just give it some giant long prompt because the small pieces, it's easier to troubleshoot, right? As you add functionality, you recognize if it works or it doesn't basically instantly, right? What this code analysis we're getting ready to talk about here is we talked about the big advantage that the web browser has, right? It has that memory, it has that context of the other chats within that window. The API doesn't have that. But what it does bring to the table is a much larger context window, right? And you see they're up to 128,000 tokens. What does that even mean? A token is how these models measure input and output. A token is generally about 4 English letters, right? So think of a word as like 1.5 tokens, right? It's just kind of like a rough kind of oversimplification there. And so if you're using ChatGPT through the web browser at all, you've probably given it a lot of information and it's just like, yeah, no, I can't look at that. That's too many pages because you're talking about a context window of a few thousand, right? It's like 4,000, a little over that, I believe, last time I looked. Whereas with the API now, I'm over 100,000. And even like Google's what used to be Bard, now it's Gemini. We're talking about context windows that even make this look small. Claude, the same thing. They're saying all of their models right now are going to be capable of basically already capable of going to 1 million and remembering everything from the very beginning too. And that's huge, right? And so with this much more context that we can provide, we can add amazingly specific details to our prompts. And so you see here on this screen, and then this one right here, what it is, I wrote a tiny little Python script. I will happily share it with anyone who wants to. Just hit me up. I'm super easy to find on Twitter, email, matt0177@gmail.com, etc. But basically what this does is it says, hey, there's a Python code over here. I want you to analyze this and give me basically your opinion on it, an overview of its functionality, how it does what it does, a security assessment, OPSEC assessment, make recommendations on protecting OPSEC when using it, etc. Right? Because everyone says, oh, before you run anything, make sure you review the code, but that's not always easy. Right? Even if you're an experienced coder, that's time consuming. And if you're not new to Python, that can be very difficult. But now we have very simple Python code and ChatGPT. And so I can take this Python code, run this, point it at a program, and it spits out in well-formatted Markdown and a PDF, a nice, consistent analysis of this program, what it does, how it does it, any OPSEC concerns, anything like that, right? It's very consistent. It's very well done. And every time I run this, when I ran this on this particular code that you're seeing a copy of the report here, it cost me about 2 cents in API usage, right? So very little. Using ChatGPT through the API is actually more cost efficient for most people than using it through the web browser, right? And so just an example there of having this to where, imagine when I was with the government, right, and I founded numerous OSINT teams, I would have killed for this capability to, oh, I want to use this program, or one of my, team members wants to use this program. Yeah, just download it, run this against it, and then just look at the report. Right? That's crazy. It's consistent. It's amazing. It's quick, right? It takes like less than a minute to generate. Kind of a total no-brainer. Let's talk a little bit now about processing, right? And processing is one that is oftentimes overlooked in the Intel cycle, right? My entire career with the government, I always had heard collection analysis, collection and analysis, collection and analysis. And I always kind of chuckled because there's a missing piece in there, right? It's processing. It's taking the raw data from collection and putting in a format that it's able to be analyzed in, right? And I always used to joke, everyone wants all the data until you give them all the data. Right. Oh, yeah, I want all the data. Cool. Here's a 12 gigabyte database. I just downloaded from a forum or the dark web, etc. And now they have no idea really what to do with it, right? Most of the people that I've worked with. And so processing is taking that data that's collected and putting in a format to where, once again, it's able to be analyzed. And in last year's talk, we talked about OpenAI's transcription and translation tool, Whisper. And if you've never played with Whisper, it's black magic. I don't know how else to describe it, right? Because it's local. You just download and then it doesn't need to go out to the internet, right? And I don't know how it can transcribe and translate in so many languages when it only downloads like a 500 meg model by default, the medium model. It's insanely effective, good at what it does, et cetera, right? But once again, we're not here to rehash what we talked about. We're here to kind of build on that. And so how we're going to build on that, we're going to kind of keep it in the offline vein for processing for OPSEC reasons, etc. And we're going to talk about RAG. I mentioned this earlier, but I said we would get into it more later. What RAG is, you see their retrieval augmented generation. This has been a huge thing all year so far this year. And it's people have figured out that, we have this model that we've trained on a bunch of data. But now we have some new data that we want to give it. We don't need to retrain the model. We don't need to basically rebuild this every single time we want to add in more data. We can just add in more data and have it use the current capabilities of the model, but then also reference all that data that we've added in and incorporate that into its analysis and results as well too. And this is extremely effective. It's efficient. Like it's just a very, very smart way to do things, right? And we can keep this analysis local, right? I said in last year's talk, like the local models were already existing, they were only becoming easier, and that has absolutely happened over the past year. If you look here, something called LM Studio, you see their Mac, Linux, Windows. We just download this. You can pick what local model you want to run, right? Some are big, some are small, some have maybe a certain like specialty where they focus on like writing code or analyzing code, etc. Right? But a lot of them are just general use. But we can download these models and run them on our system. And if we have a decent graphics card, right? It's kind of funny. Like no one uses graphics cards for playing games for so long now, right? First they were playing games, then they were mining cryptocurrency. Now it's for running these local models on our systems, right? But think about this. Imagine, right? And at this point, I don't think any of the local models, frankly, are as good as ChatGPT, right? Some of them have some metrics that are kind of getting close, but none of them are as good, but they're local, right? And so every time you're like, oh yeah, ChatGPT would be great, but I can't because of OPSEC. Oh, ChatGPT would be great because I can't because of this. Well, if you're doing it locally and the data's not going anywhere, right, that alleviates a lot of those concerns. So yeah, these local models are absolutely huge. They really, really, truly are. And I had a student. I was teaching my class last week, and I had a student from a military unit, not the U.S., another country, who was like, "Okay, but how hard are these to set up?" And I'm like, "They're incredibly easy. It is download it, install it, and run it like you do any other program. It truly is that simple." And what it's made it's easier than any of them is actually NVIDIA, one of the companies that makes graphic cards, the ones that pretty much everyone in this space now is using. And if you have a modern NVIDIA graphics card, and what I mean by modern is 3000 series, 4000 series with at least 8 gigs of RAM, you can download this, install it, and run it. It's about 30 gigs on disk, so it's not small. But what it does is right now it's only got one local model in there. I'm hoping they add more in it soon. But it has this local model, the Mistral, but it has built-in RAG functionality. And so when it installs, not only do you have the local model that you could ask questions to like ChatGPT, but then it puts a folder on your disk and it says, yeah, any documents you want to add in here, just put them in the folder. And once again, this is completely offline, right? So I'm not worried about OPSEC. I'm not worried about a lot of these issues. What does this actually look like? So I installed it on one of my computers. It's got a 4070 video card with 16 gigs of RAM on it. So it's not the very top of the line graphics card, but it's a pretty good one. And I asked the model, what do you know about Juan Soto? I didn't tell it it was a baseball player or anything. I just said, what do you know about Juan Soto? Said he was a baseball player with the Washington Nationals, which that was like 3 years, two teams ago, right? Very, very little information. Then in that folder, I dropped in a 300-page PDF full of baseball statistics. You see here, right? It's the book on baseball. I'm in like two really nerdy simulation fantasy baseball leagues. Like, yes, make fun of me. I don't care. But I have these books, right? My wife will see them. And she's like, they're just numbers. I'm like, yeah, right. That's what I want. And so you have this 300-page PDF that looks exactly like this. It's just numbers, stats, etc. I dropped it into the folder, restarted the tool. It took about 4 minutes to analyze and ingest this. Once it was done, I re-asked the question of, what can you tell me about Juan Soto? See here, how good is Juan Soto? And all of a sudden, it goes from very, very sparse details to like highly skilled, talented. It's quoting stats, right? Soto finished number one in earnings, ranked number one coming into the season, making him one of the most valuable players in the game. It is insane. And it's telling me which document it actually referenced for this information. I then ask it, if I have the first pick in fantasy baseball simulation league, who should I draft? And it gives me just kind of some general advice. This is crazy because you see, it's trying to analyze like what winning teams are doing and making some recommendations on that. It actually doesn't give me a recommendation. And so I don't have the screenshot here, but I pressed it. And I'm like, no, no, like give me actual advice on what I should do. And then it did. It actually, and if you don't play fantasy baseball, this won't necessarily mean anything to you or aren't a baseball fan in general, but it told me to go with top tier pitching at the beginning of the draft. But then it explained its reason and it said pitchers are far more likely to get hurt than hitters, which seems counterintuitive. It's 100% true, but then it's like, then why are you recommending me to go pitching? And basically, it's like, but if they hit big, and you need pitching to hit big to win. And so it kind of went full Ricky Bobby. And basically, like, if you're not trying to win it, who cares? Who cares if you get second or 12th? Go for the win. Right. And I'm like, kudos, right? I liked its aggressiveness. I like the strategy laid out. But once again, all of this just because I dropped a 300-page PDF full of baseball stats in there, which it took about 4 minutes to ingest. This is crazy. And the speed, by the way, on that 4070 video card, the speed was at least as quick as ChatGPT. Like when ChatGPT is humming along quick and giving you back real time, no delays or whatever, it was at least that speed, if not a little quicker. Right. So the speed there with these local models too, like I said, if you got a good graphics card, can be incredible. All right. Let's get into a little bit of analysis now. And in last year's talk, I gave like one of my favorite examples ever. And what it was is the Conti, the ransomware gang, when Russia invaded Ukraine, several members of Conti came out and supported that, which they're Russian, okay. But then there was Ukrainian members as well too. And so what happened is tens of thousands of their chat messages got leaked out and it was in JSON. It was fairly ugly. It was, all in Russian for the most part. And the example I gave is I told ChatGPT, hey, analyze this data and just give me a summary of the different chats between members. And so what it did was crazy, right? This is kind of processing and analysis rolled up into one, right? Because it dealt with the JSON, it dealt with the fact they were in Russian and put it in English, and then it actually summarized it, right? So you see there a conversation between this person about this, a conversation between this person about this. That's insane, right? And I still think to this day, one of the most kind of underutilized, amazing capabilities of this technology is to summarize information. I love it. I use it literally daily. And so, once again, right, we're not going to rehash that. We're here to build on it. And one thing that I've been talking about for a while that I really hope becomes kind of one of the hot buzzwords of 2024 is a term of grounding, right? And grounding, when you're in intelligence, right, you always use the term ground truth, ground truth. And what ground truth is, maybe I'm at headquarters, right? Maybe at Washington, D.C., and someone says, hey, listen, right? Like in this area, crossings are basically very, very low. We've had this huge decrease in crossings in this one particular area of the border. And we think it's because of our new policy, because this drop off has been insane for the past 10 days. And everyone kind of pats themselves on the back. Well, ground truth is calling down someone who works that area and saying, hey, this is what we're seeing. Is this why? And they laugh and they say, no, it's because it's been raining for 10 days straight. Bad thunderstorms, like areas are impassable. That's what's going on, right? And so actually going to someone in that area, right, boots on the ground, and we need that for AI, right? We need this grounding, right? Because people that are kind of experienced with AI or more kind of negative AI and don't want to always jump on the hype bandwagon, which isn't a bad quality. Well, you can't trust AI, right? Hallucinations that make things up, hallucinations, right? And so what we need is we need grounding. We need to take the results and actually run it against known good data and do some things to say, does this look accurate or not, right? And that's an important concept. And it's something that we need to work on in this space. This is not going away overnight. But we actually now, once again, things that have changed in the past year, have some tools where we can help this right now, right? Not coming soon, but right now. And one of those tools, right, is we now have some frameworks. Microsoft came out with something called AutoGen several months ago. And right after that, someone came out with something called Crew AI that actually built on that and added some more capabilities. And what these are is they let you develop applications with multiple AI agents. What does that mean? If you've used ChatGPT, right, down the left-hand side, like we said earlier, it has your previous kind of chats. And so maybe I have one working on this program and another working on this program and another on another project and I'm writing something, etc. And each one of those almost becomes like its own little person, right? Because you give it different instructions, etc. Well, this lets you basically take and make little AI people out of those, right? So before, basically what we're doing is we're saying, hey, I want you to build me a website that looks like this. This is what I want the functionality to be. We're getting the output and then we're basically just testing it, tweaking it, et cetera, right? It's a very kind of back and forth iterative process. Well, now I can make an agent that I give it the instructions of, you're a top shelf website designer. You're going to build me a website that looks exactly like this. And now we can make a second little AI person and we can make them our quality control person. This is the functionality we need this site to have. Work with them, tell them how to improve it, test it so that it has that functionality. And then we basically introduce the two of them, tell them to battle it out and go make a sandwich. Right? When we come back, we likely have much, much better results. And you think like, well, if the technology is flawed, then having two instances of it, right? Does that really help us? And the answer is yes, right? Information security in general is basically a combination of a bunch of systems, all of which are imperfect, but working together, we're so much better off, with them than we are without them. And a lot of things in life are like that, right? And this is that same way. So basically being able to make these little personas and have them work together gives us much, much better results and can actually sanity check, right? Take the output from this, run it against this folder full of information here, and tell me, does this look accurate? Right? I mean, that's insane to be able to have that capability now. Right. And you don't even really have to write much code now to use it, right? Microsoft recently released AutoGen Studio. And so there can actually, with no code, sit there and kind of add in some of this functionality. So once again, this is getting easier and easier to work with, right? The hard stuff is getting more and more abstracted away from us every single day. More analysis, a few things, and this is kind of on the here and also in the near horizon. There's a guy named Harishi on Twitter who doesn't have 1 million followers, but he should, because his commentary on AI, and he actually owns an AI business and does a lot of amazing research with it, but he also has some very hot takes. Like, he's not going for attention. He's just going to share his information and give his opinions. And his opinions are unbelievably well formed and accurate in my experience. If you're interested in the space, like, you should absolutely follow him. And he came out with something earlier this month, right? Just a little over a week ago, that was amazing. And you see there, the coolest thing we've ever done and probably the least sexiest demo. But if you've ever done a lot of statistical analysis work, you realize how amazing what it is. And basically his demo, he took a folder and he dropped a bunch of different data sets in there. And it was all like kind of airline data. Some were in Excel spreadsheets, some were in CSVs, all had different formatted, different column names, things would call them different names, etc. Then it's like, okay, throw this database file in there, throw basically all this other disparate data and all these different formats, different schemas, etc. into this directory, and then started asking his code plain English questions about the data. And his code was answering the questions and spitting out the results in well-formatted JSON with like a good schema. No translation, no trying to like map up, oh, this field here means this field here means this field here, all just automatically. Right. And I mean, he has this now, right? It says he's been working on it for months. It's incredible, right? We're on the verge of having this ourselves too, and it's just going to make, as human beings, right? People don't generally enjoy doing that type of process manually, right? We like to use our creativity, we like to use our analytical skills, and so it's really going to free us up in a lot of ways to focus on things that not only are we better at, but that we enjoy more, which is a good thing. Right. And in the same vein, a good friend of mine, I was chatting with him last night, actually, Mick Douglas, Better Safety Net on Twitter, one of the smartest people I've ever met. And I do not say that lightly. He just released kind of an alpha of his tool he calls Concierge. And it basically has built-in RAG functionality, a local model, etc. What is amazing about this? The model doesn't need a graphics card. Right now, the vector database, which actually handles like the embedding the data and storing it for to give that RAG functionality so we can bring in our own data, is he actually has running in a Docker container. And on GitHub right now, he has an outstanding issue to put the entire thing in a Docker container. And I texted him last night and I'm like, hey, like I saw that issue. Like, is that like you think gonna happen or is that just like wishful thinking? He's like, no, it's gonna happen. He's like, I'm still making some refinements for the code, but it's coming. To be able to have this type of functionality potentially in a Docker container, right, running off CPU, not GPU, is incredible. Some of these models, right, don't have as full featured as ChatGPT, but they're much smaller on disk, much lower resources. And that's going to make some things that just frankly weren't possible before possible because it's not going to do super complicated work, but it can do things like sentiment analysis, right? And the models are going to get so small that, frankly, I think we'll see a lot of people just include them into their apps and just kind of make that part of the apps that they distribute out. All right, let's finish up strong here. I think we're going to hit the 40-minute mark, like pretty much spot on. Kudos, kudos. Right. Let's talk about reporting. And the last time I used ChatGPT to help me with Excel formulas, certain things like that. But once again, now we're going to talk about using the API, right? And the API is a separate subscription. It's not included if you have ChatGPT and you pay like the $20 a month. The API isn't included, but once again, it's very cheap to use. Like I'll use it on something. It's like, yeah, that was 2 cents, right? I am perfectly okay with that. And I like too that you just buy credits in advance. So then it's not going to go like out of control and rack up an insane bill. And so once again, right, we see this, the API, we have these much larger context sizes. So we can give it some incredibly detailed prompts and we can get back very, very nice output, right? Where we can specify, I want this output in well-formatted markdown, right? I want it like this. I want you to say this, just very, very descriptive about exactly what we want. And if you want to see what some of the most amazing prompts ever are, it's a gentleman named Daniel Missler, who once again is one of my favorite people to follow in this space. He does amazing work. And a little over a month ago, he released a project called Fabric. And Fabric is absolutely amazing, right? What makes it amazing? Let's take a look. What Fabric is, it's a little bit over engineered for how most people need it, but I think what most people want is only one particular tiny part of it. Is basically now he's got this kind of integrated with everything he does. So he can see something online that he likes, and he can just like with a couple of keystrokes or mouse clicks, just send it over to AI to analyze, to summarize, and just put it onto things that maybe he's going to include in his weekly newsletter. His weekly newsletter, I personally love it. I get a ton of value out of it. I recommend it all the time. But the actual prompts that he's using for this analysis are the real gold here that we can all incorporate, right? And so if we look here on his GitHub for Daniel Missler Fabric, and we click on patterns, and we can see there he's got a bunch of different patterns. And inside, what is a pattern? It's just a prompt, basically, right? Let's look at one to explain code. And I haven't looked at this one yet, I don't think. You see their system and user. When you're using the API, you can specify a system prompt. And there's some ability through the GUI to do similar things now as well, too. And basically, what's the difference between a system and a user? A user is the normal way you interact with ChatGPT. You're making requests, you're getting responses, etc. A system is kind of you laying out its personality almost, right? This is who you are. A system prompt is not a request, it's an order, right? This is where you say you are a stone cold ninja at Python code. You explain things like this, you do this, right? And so that's if you're seeing system and user. Let's look at the system prompts here. We have identity and purpose. You're an expert coder that takes code and documentation as input and does your best to explain it, right? If the content is code, you see their explanation, configuration, answer, output, do not output warnings or notes. So that one's actually fairly short, right? Let's Let's look at write essay. This is a really, really good one, in my opinion. You see, as a quick note, the fact that it uses Paul Graham as an example, so feel free to replace it with your own style. But this is the reporting section. One thing that I know is with ChatGPT and now Opus, right? And Google Gemini, if you give it like a plain 10 prompt, like 10 word prompt, you're going to get back a fairly plain response. But if you give it just very, very detailed instructions and you provide it with like samples of your writing that you like, that you think represents you well, the output is going to be so much better, like night and day difference. It really is. And so let's take a look at the system prompt here, right? You see there, you are an expert on writing concise, clear, and illuminating essays on the topic of the input provided. And you see there, write the essay in the style of Paul Graham, who is known for his concise, clear, and simple style. And now it provides an essay. This is all part of the prompt because once again, we can get away with this because through the API, we have much larger context windows. And I didn't even show you the entire prompt that I used for my code analysis. It was even longer than this, right? This is game changing, though. I exposed my wife to this about a month ago, kind of showing her some of the stuff that he was working on. I had access to Fabric before it was released and that I was working on. And it was funny. We were walking yesterday afternoon and she actually thanked me. She's like, just thank you so much. She's like, that's been a game changer in so many things for threat modeling, etc. It's really kind of amazing capability. And then after the sample, you see there, right, the output format. Output a full publish-ready essay using the instructions provided. Write in this style, simple, plain, clear. Do not use cliches or jargon. Do not output warnings or notes. Do not include common setup language like in conclusion, in closing, right? Things like that. These are quality prompts, right? So even if you don't go through the whole setup, like I said, the whole setup is, I think, a little bit more than most people need. Just coming through and looking through some of these prompts, right? Getting some very basic Python code so you can do these things and just pay a couple pennies every time you use it is really a game changer. It is. I'm doing this every single day and I don't think I'm doing it enough. I just really, really, truly don't. So, yeah, if you're going to play with anything else, kind of check out what quality prompts look like. I think once again that right there is a great place to start. So, with that said, like I said, I'm super easy to get a hold of: email, Twitter, etc., etc. If you have any questions, I think we have a few questions in here. We'll see what Paula says. So,
We do. We do have
we
some
nailed the
questions.
40 minutes. That was pretty much
That
spot.
was very, very
Yeah.
good. Excellent job.
So I can see the
Uh,
questions now.
yeah,
So let's see, Scarlett, is there somewhere we can watch the recording for the webinar on ChatGPT? Yes, that is on YouTube. If you look up my name, it was out about almost exactly a year ago, I think. And if you have any issues finding it, just shoot me a link. But yeah, I think it's been watched like quite a bit on YouTube already. So yeah.
yeah, we'll include a link to that in a follow-up email as well as your session with us last year, the OSINT APIs one. We'll include that link as well.
So now we just got to figure out what one we'll do next. Specific like models trained just for OSINT, I have not seen it. One of the things that ChatGPT, one of the functionalities they added in was Dev Day, was being able to, number one, add in our own data, right? The same way I did with my little baseball PDF. Sorry for the baseball analogy, but to be able to add in our own data. And you can basically make that and make your own little GPT. And that was like a big deal. One of the things they released at Dev Day several months ago. And so I haven't seen a model trained specifically for OSINT, but I've seen OSINT versions of that where people basically gather up a bunch of OSINT information, add it into a chat GPT thing and make like a little OSINT GPT or Mat GPT or something like that. So there are some of those out there. In all honesty, I haven't really been using them much. I just really, really haven't. I've just been using the base capability. And if I want to add in my own data, kind of adding in my own data. Because, like I said, especially if it's local, then I don't have the offset concerns. Like, that's amazing. So, way better than the active conversation I'm having with a scammer right now. Like I said, I'm not saying that that's better than like a native speaker with 10 years in the space and everything else, but I think it's a heck of a lot better than I would be doing with Google Translate. I really, really, truly do. And just like I said, to kind of know how to react sometimes to like a comment or, like a post on a forum to, like I said, make it appear like you're at least a somewhat normal user. I love it, right? And the Russian, the English, and the actual explanation of why you're saying what you're saying. So, have you open sourced any of your prompts processing tools? Not yet, Matt. And it's not because like I don't want to or is anything proprietary. Like I will email them to anyone who asks. It's just kind of like a work in progress, right? I'm still kind of developing these. So, but yeah, no, I will gladly. Everyone who comes to my class, they kind of know like I don't hold back when I teach. Like I say exactly what I'm doing. And if you want to implement it yourself, like knock yourself out, right? That's just kind of how I am. So, is Whisper a mobile app? Whisper is pretty lightweight. It is. I wouldn't say I haven't tested it specifically on a mobile device, but I mean the model itself is lightweight. It's two pip installs. It's one pip install to install it, and then you need FFmpeg, which is an open source library you may have heard of. It's used for processing audio and video. And then the first time you use it, by default, it downloads the medium model, and the medium model is seriously only like 500 megs. And then it just sits there and like crushes it. I've run it on a Nook. I know it would run fine on a Pi. I have no reason to believe. I've never tested it on anything ARM, but yeah, as long as it runs on ARM, I have no reason why it wouldn't run on a mobile device. So, can you give the RTX personas? The model that the RTX uses, the Mistral, it's okay. Right? It's okay. It's not as good, my limited experience in testing. And let me be clear here. I am not an AI researcher, right? I kind of play with the tech because I I have things that I need to do every day, right? I have my business, right? I have my SANS courses. I have other things that I'm doing in just general life. Clearly wasting time playing like really nerdy fantasy baseball simulation things, right? And so all these things that I'm trying to do, I'm not an AI researcher. I'm using this tech to make me more efficient and more effective at what I'm doing. Right. And so it's with that, I kind of just like, I know what the best is and I use that, right, more than the dabble with the others. And so it's not like I've done extensive testings, but the RTX model that they're using now, the newer Mistral, is good, but it's not as good as like Opus and ChatGPT. And so I think we could give it personas. I don't know honestly how good the quality would be at this point. But once again, I said last year's talk, I'm like, anyone who kind of like poo-pooing this is like, because honestly, right, especially in information security in general, there's always the next big thing. This is going to change everything, and it changes very, very little. AI is not that. It isn't. And I said last year, I said, pointing out the flaws in this is perfectly valid, and it's an important conversation to have right now. But also just realize this is like the Model T era of the tech. The same way if you could travel back over 100 years and look at the Model T and be like, this is horrible. Like carriages are way better. Like this is not going to be a thing. Well, that was just the very early version, right? And we're still early. Like it's better than it was. We have all these advancements that we didn't have a year ago, and that's only been a year. Right. So yeah. So I think, like I said, I think these local models are only going to get better and better. Local offline AI tool that can adapt files and conduct analysis of those files. Honestly, Thomas, like it just makes it so easy. The NVIDIA RTX, if you have a card it supports, like just the ease of use, the lack of setup. Because otherwise, right, if you want to have that context, if you want to have that RAG kind of functionality, you have to kind of set up a vector database and deal with like LangChain or something that can analyze your documents. And basically, what a vector database does, it kind of summarizes your data. For lack of, a gross oversimplification. I'm sorry to any researchers in this space, right? But it does all of that for you. It does, and it's very, very easy. So what I really want is basically right now we have like LM Studio that makes downloading local models like from Hugging Face in different places unbelievably easy. I want a combination of that with the built-in RAG functionality that NVIDIA has with their RTX chat. Like once we have that, we're golden because then you can just pick and choose whatever model you want, right? Based on your specs, based on your uses, etc. So yeah. Yeah. Have you compared these models to Evil GPT as well? It's a great question, Optic Grinder. One of the things is last year, very early on, these models like ChatGPT, right, and Google Bard when it came out, they were all trying to impress us. The race was to impress us. The race changed. And the race changed. No one announced it publicly, but it absolutely changed. And then it was like, yeah, we still want to impress, but we also need to limit liability, right? And I said that publicly last year at a talk I was keynoting at a summit. And I had someone come up to me after who works at one of these companies, and they said, you were absolutely right. They said, he's like, I'm in meetings basically every day, and like liability is always a thing, right? What I mean by limiting liability is like they don't want people basically like asking it medical questions, getting an improper diagnosis, and then suing them, right? That is extremely legitimate. And most of the offline models now are still somewhat restricted. The RTX would tell me how to hotwire a car, but there are other things that I asked it that it would not do. But we're starting to see these models now that basically are completely unrestricted, right? And the more restricted the commercial ones become, the more people are going to use offline ones that aren't restricted. So right now, no offline one has this amazing performance. But I mean, once we get ones with offline with really, really good performance and unrestricted, obviously that's going to have some huge advantages for some people, depending on what they want to use it for, right? Red teaming operations, helping to create malware, things like that, et cetera, et cetera. And that's going to be good for some and bad for a lot, unfortunately. So,
I can
yeah.
imagine the offline ones might be preferred in a situation where you just want the model to learn about your own proprietary
Oh,
data,
yeah. Yeah,
right?
100%. 100%. And two, like, so right now, if you have the OPSEC concerns, if you have like the policy, right? Policy is a huge thing. Then basically, number one, you have an offline option. And number two, you have like these large companies like Microsoft, right? Like I know some large, Fortune 500 organizations that are using this capability, but basically they have like a deal with Microsoft where everything is kept private. Right, their data is not going anywhere. Their data isn't being used to train. Right, they have all those agreements in place. And so, right now, if you have those concerns, either from like OPSEC from an OSINT perspective or regulations, policies, et cetera, from a private sector perspective, your two options are basically offline or have enough money to kind of get those agreement with one of those places. But yeah, absolutely. Being able to give it access to your data you don't want to share and do that all locally. I mean, that is right now the killer functionality of the local models. It 100% is. So any OSINT related resources that collect some or all the examples you've gone through today, not that I've seen, Bjorn, not specifically to OSINT. That is a really, really good idea, though. It is. But yeah, that would be a good idea. But no, like I said, right now it's still very kind of early phases. The people that I follow in this space, Missler is very kind of pragmatic about it. He focuses on summarizing, he focuses on, just making it more efficient and effective at what he does daily. But I like a lot, I like Hirishi's stuff on Twitter for kind of musing on new developments. There's a couple people on YouTube that do some pretty good stuff. There's a guy named like a Matthew Berman. Some of his stuff is a little sponsored sometimes, but otherwise he usually comes out with pretty good takes on stuff. So those are kind of the ones that I watch. But I mean, literally, you can watch a video on new development basically every night. Like that is how quickly this space is changing. I mean, some of them are overblown and some of them aren't. How do you cite AI generated content you publish or distribute? That's a great question, Dennis. It is, right? I'm always like open and honest about what I use it. Like I said, right now, the big thing I'm using it for is my writing my code. It is like I've got some really cool things going on for persistent monitoring and reconnaissance. And it just like, I can't even tell you how much more efficient I am at banging stuff out, adding in functionality because I'm using it for me. What I want to get better at, like full disclosure here, Dennis, I've got so much going on, and we all do, right? All of us are busy. I'm not writing nearly as many blog posts as I want to. Like I'm in the process of rewriting, creating a lot of new content for the advanced OSINT course at SANS that I love, but then also like I haven't had as much time to do some things that I was better at before. And so one of the things that I really want to do is to try to use this technology. I had a student, a former student reach out to me last week with a very detailed question on using things like VPN and Tor to bypass nation state censorship in places like, China, Iran, etc. And I gave what I thought was a very detailed, thorough answer. They thanked me for it, but I'm like, God, like this would actually make for an amazing blog post, right? Not giving away the person's name, anything like that, the original email, but a blog post. So what I want to start doing is I want to use this. I'll probably do it in the next couple of days to kind of take things like that and help me kind of flesh it out into a blog post, if that makes sense. and still kind of go in to modify and tweak. But if I can get closer to what I'm happy with final output, I will absolutely use that. So right now I'm not using AI output and just claiming it's my own. I'm not, but I want to get better at kind of using that to get it closer to what a final product should be from something that I've done, if that makes sense. So just to make me, like I said, more efficient at what I'm doing. So your experience in reverse engineering phishing email, throwing headers. Yeah, no, exactly. No, for offensive operations, for red teaming, this is huge, right? Not only the coming up with good pretext for phishing, which honestly, the pretext is some people are just going to click on anything, if we're being honest, but the deep fakes, right? Like I just listened recently to an organization. They dealt with basically an MGM style copycat account, and listening to the phone call of the help desk, which was successful, it was just rough to listen to because it wasn't good. But what happens when, right, they can fake people's voices? I mean, right now, there's so many scams out there, romance scams. People like send me emails like their relatives are getting, bilked out of their money and their savings, etc. Like, what happens when now people can basically impersonate you, can take a sample of your voice, right? I've got hours of my talks that are out there on YouTube and other sources. People can now basically come up with an exact copy of my voice and have it say whatever they want and use that to fake phone calls, etc. From a phishing, from a social engineering perspective, it's terrifying. It really, really, truly is. There's no other way to describe it. It is, like I said, whenever you talk about the offensive implications, writing malware that's like polymorphic and metamorphic, these deep fakes, it's going to be good for those doing offensive operations, but bad for virtually everyone else. It just is. So, because right now, the stuff to detect AI, I'm really not having a whole lot of trouble with when I try to bypass it. So, just to be honest. So, best place to get started, Jeff, just start playing with it. Seriously. So, use ChatGPT through the front end, kind of get a feel for it. One of my old analysts reached out to me with a Python question a month ago. And I don't know if she's watching or not. If she is, she'll laugh that I'm telling this story. And I'm like, hey, I'm not at home right now. Like, and also, why are you asking me and not ChatGPT? And she's like, yeah, I'm really not on that bandwagon yet. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, seriously, start playing with it, start using it, start experimenting with it. And the big takeaway is for all you people, play around with the AI a little bit. Like I said, it's a separate little thing you got to sign up for, even if you're a paying member of ChatGPT or you're not, right? You don't have to be to sign up, but give it like a $10 credit, right? If you can. And then, like I said, a use is only like a penny, but just get some little bit of basic Python code that can run it, because then what you're going to do is all of a sudden, instead of your prompt being like two sentences, when your prompt looks like something that's one of the patterns from Fabric, God, you're going to love the output. You just really, really, truly are. Like I said, when I was running teams of OSINT teams for the government, I would have killed to have some of the functionality I have now, to where I can just run a Python script, it analyzes code, and then less than a minute later, I've got this beautiful, detailed PDF explaining the pros, the cons, how it works, what it does, any issues, and recommendations for OPSEC. That's insane. It really is. AI tools, greater advantages, security professionals, threat exactors themselves. Um, I think, Andrew, it'll be a total cat and mouse game. I do. I think we're going to have some amazing defensive things. I do, right? The threat actors themselves are going to get, like I said, social engineering, things like that are going to be great. But I think for defenders, it's going to be really, really good as well too, right? As things know what normal looks like. It is. I think it's going to take some time to get there. SANS is getting ready to release an AI survey, and I don't know if I'm supposed to say this or not, but whatever. I'm the one who was writing all the questions for that, and so kind of coming up with questions that I'm interested in for the industry and what people are actually finding success with, what they're seeing as the challenges of this. But I think some of the things that we may get on the defensive side and even on like the crypto side, etc., are going to be really, really cool. So I think, like I said, it's a horrible answer, but it's my honest one. It's going to be a cat and mouse game. But I think the threat actors right now have such kind of a huge advantage already that I think this is going to be great for defenders. I really, really do too. It may make the defenders game a little incrementally better, but I think basically we have more. we have more progress to be made. I think what it could do is right now, there's definitely a difference between the haves and the have-nots in security, right? Like large organizations have capabilities that small orgs just don't. And this may honestly kind of, you know, make that a little more distributed. Some of these capabilities now become just like cheaper, easier to implement because of AI. All of a sudden, people that before couldn't afford certain capabilities like user behavior analytics, etc., now may be able to. And so I really do think like I'm not just being like wishy-washy when I think it'll help security. Like, no, I actually do think it's going to help defense. I really, really, truly do. It'll just take time and implementation and training, etc. Yeah.
Hey Matt, we're at time, but I've been given the go ahead that we can go over by 5 minutes or so if you have a few more
Not
minutes.
long, not long. Input data like PDFs for learning models is possible to upload audio files. So, David, what you can do is like, for instance, YouTube, just take the transcript. Just take the transcript and then it can do that. And so a combination of things like Whisper, that tool to transcribe and even translate audio, you basically make it two-pronged, right? You use Whisper to take the audio into text, and then you can use your large language models like local GPT, whatever, to kind of analyze the transcript of that. So let's go lightning round. Let's get as many as we can. Can the model show today handle data in different languages, same time, complex languages like Arabic, Chinese? Yeah, no, most of them can, right? They like Whisper, for instance, they actually have a rating of how well they handle different languages. Right, they handle these languages really, really good. These languages not so great. And to be honest with you, like the more popular a language is, the more people speak it, the better the support's going to be for most of these. It just is. But yeah, no, it's really, really good. I mean, you saw the example of it gave me it in Russian and then in English and then an explanation of it. So, how can you ingest EDR data into AI? It's coming. It is. That's one of the uses for AI right now. And forgive me, Yigal, if that's how you pronounce the name. But right now, like you can sit there and, well, AI is not perfect. Hallucinations. Well, nothing's perfect, right? But if you have a ton of data that you're not doing anything with right now because you just have too much of it, and you don't have the bandwidth. What in the heck's the downside of hallucinations, right? I'll deal with a few false positives if now I'm actually looking through data that before isn't possible. Like I will make that trade-off 100 times in a row. That's one of the no-brainer, I think, killer things that it can bring to the table. So it's just going to be, once again, time, implementation, and what that looks like. It is. So if you come across teams or other people using this in creative ways for geopolitical intelligence, yeah, 100%. I mean, the things that you could do with this from like an influence operations are terrifying. And one thing that, like, I'm sure Flashpoint and a lot of other people will be very, very busy this year because what do we have all over the place? We have elections, right? And so we're going to be seeing this technology used in ways that we absolutely hate, more than likely. It's just real talk. So, yeah, and I think we're going to actually see a lot of that for, like I said, influence operations and certain things like that, information warfare in general. This tech, right? AI in general, and it's not a silver bullet, it's not going to cause everything. But basically, it's like everything on steroids, right? Basically, everything we're doing now, this can likely improve it, right? It can likely enhance it, the good and the bad, right? It just is. Great baseball collection. Thank you. Baseball and bourbon. That's what's behind me. You always know what my priorities are. All right. So RTX and NVIDIA card, it says a 3000 or a 4000 series. So anything made in the past couple of years, pretty good with at least 8 gigs of RAM. So I think we got most of them. If I didn't get yours, like I said, I'm super easy to get a hold of. My DMs on Twitter are open. There's my email right there. Just shoot me an email and I'll be happy to answer that. So awesome. Thank you, Paula, for leaving it open a
Yeah,
few more minutes.
thank you so much, Matt. And thank you everyone for joining. Have a great rest of the day.